In the sterile silence of courtroom 4B, he called her his greatest liability. Alistair Finch, the titan of tech, looked at the woman he was divorcing after 12 years and saw nothing but a beautiful, expensive ornament he was finally shedding. She said not a single word in her own defense, accepting a settlement so small it was an insult, a rounding error in his vast fortune. He walked out triumphant, ready to conquer the world. But what Alistair didn't know was that silence can be the most patient predator. While he was celebrating his freedom, she was signing a contract. And just 10 days later, the financial world was rocked by a single headline. Helena Vance, the silent ex-wife, had just been named the new CEO of his biggest rival. This isn't just a story about a divorce. It's about the catastrophic cost of underestimation. The courtroom was a study in cold opulence, much like the life Alistair Finch and Helena Vance had shared. The walls were paneled in dark, glossy mahogany, and the air conditioning hummed a low, monotonous tune that did nothing to ease the tension. Alistair, founder and CEO of the billion-dollar fintech giant Ethereum Analytics, sat with his back ramrod straight. His suit, a bespoke piece from Savile Row Taylor, Anderson & Shepherd, was impeccable. To his side, his lawyer, a shark named Lawrence Adler, shuffled papers with performative importance. Across the aisle sat Helena. If Alistair was a portrait of power, Helena was one of unnerving stillness. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress that spoke of quiet money, not the flashy couture Alistair had always insisted upon. Her dark hair was pulled back into a neat chignon, revealing the clean, intelligent lines of her face. But it was her eyes that held the room captive. They were fixed on the judge, betraying no emotion. No anger, no sadness, no fear. Just a profound, impenetrable calm. Mr. Finch, the judge began, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room. Your filings cite irreconcilable differences, primarily stemming from what your counsel describes as a divergence in professional and intellectual pursuits. Lawrence Adler cleared his throat. That's correct, Your Honor. Mr. Finch is at the forefront of global algorithmic trading. His life is one of immense pressure and intellectual rigor. Mrs. Vance, while a wonderful hostess and a supportive partner for many years, does not share that world. The chasm simply became too wide to bridge. It was a masterclass in polite condescension. She's not smart enough for me. That was the message delivered in legalese. Alistair glanced at Helena, expecting a flicker of indignation, a tear, anything. He got nothing. Her silence was absolute. The settlement was the next point of order. It was by all accounts a joke. Alistair was worth an estimated $2.8 billion. The prenuptial agreement was ironclad, but even so, a wife of 12 years could have fought for a substantial sum, a percentage of the wealth accumulated during their marriage. The media had predicted a war, a battle of titans that would splash across the pages of the Wall Street Journal and Vanity Fair for months. Instead, Helena had asked for a single lump sum of $5 million, the deed to a modest brownstone in Boston she had inherited from her grandmother, and a gag order preventing Alistair from speaking publicly about her. Adler presented the terms with a triumphant smirk. My client finds these terms surprisingly amicable, Your Honor. He has graciously agreed. Graciously? Alistair nearly scoffed. He was buying his freedom for the price of a rounding error. He had spent more on a yacht he used twice a year. The $5 million was a pittance, a way to be seen as fair while utterly dominating the proceedings. He had expected her to fight, to scream, to hire her own pack of legal wolves. He had been prepared for a battle. This quiet acquiescence was frankly unsettling. Mrs. Vance, the judge said, turning to her. Her lawyer, a quiet, sharp-eyed woman named Clara Bennett, placed a hand on her arm. You have reviewed these terms. You understand that you are waiving any and all future claims to Mr. Finch's estate, his business holdings, his stock options, and any assets related to Ethereum Analytics. Helena turned her head slightly. For the first time, her eyes met Alistair's across the aisle. There was no pain in her gaze, no lingering affection. There was something else, something he couldn't decipher. It looked almost like pity. Yes, Your Honor, she said. Her voice was clear and steady without a hint of tremor. "I understand. I agree to the terms." That was it. The only 2 sentences she had spoken all morning. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that sealed the end of their 12-year marriage. Alistair felt a surge of pure, unadulterated relief. It was over. He was free. Free from the social obligations, free from the pretense of a partnership, free from the quiet judgment he sometimes saw in her eyes when he'd come home late smelling of whiskey and ambition. As they filed out, he walked past her. He felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to say something, to offer a final patronizing olive branch. "Helena," he said, stopping her, "I do wish you the best. Find something to keep you busy." She paused and looked up at him. The look in her eyes was no longer pity. It was something colder, sharper. It was the look of a strategist assessing an opponent. "Don't worry about me, Alistair," she said, her voice a low murmur. "I'll be fine." Then she walked away, her heels clicking with quiet finality on the marble floor, leaving Alistair Finch standing in the echoing hall, the undisputed victor of a battle his opponent had never even bothered to fight. Or so he thought. The week following the divorce was a blur of self-congratulation for Alistair Finch. He threw a lavish freedom party at his penthouse overlooking Central Park, a sprawling palace of glass and steel. The guest list was a who's who of Wall Street predators and Silicon Valley wunderkinds. Dom Perignon flowed like water, and the air buzzed with the masculine energy of conquest. To Alistair, toasted Marcus Thorne Etherion's Keogh, and Alistair's most loyal sycophant. Finally unshackled, ready to take Etherion into the stratosphere. Alistair raised his glass, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. "The dead weight is gone, Marcus. From now on, it's pure, unadulterated focus." He regaled his audience with a sanitized, dismissive version of the divorce. "She was smart enough to know she couldn't win," he'd say with a chuckle. Took the settlement and ran. Probably off to Boston to redecorate her grandmother's old house. A nice little hobby for her. The men around him would laugh, their wives and girlfriends smiling tightly. They all knew Helena, or knew of her. The impeccably dressed silent woman at Alistair's side at every gala, every fundraiser. The one who could discuss Renaissance art or geopolitical tensions in the South China Sea with equal fluency, only to have Alistair cut in with a patronizing "Helena's my cultural attaché. Aren't you, darling?" He had painted her as a beautiful, intelligent, but ultimately ambitionless creature, content to live in his shadow. And she had never contradicted him. His focus now was singular Project Chimera. It was Etherion's magnum opus, a predictive AI algorithm designed to corner the commodities market. It was years in the making, a complex, revolutionary piece of code that would make Etherion Analytics not just a major player, but the undisputed king. The final phase of development was underway, and they were courting the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world, the Arabian Caliphate Fund, for an exclusive multi-billion-dollar contract. Their only real competitor was Cygnus Dynamics. Cygnus was the perennial underdog, always a step behind Etherion. They were scrappy, innovative, but lacked Alistair's killer instinct and Etherion's sheer financial muscle. Their CEO, a plodding but decent man named Richard Davies, was retiring, and the company was seen as being in a vulnerable state of transition. Alistair considered them a nuisance, not a threat. "Davies is out to pasture," Alistair said in a board meeting a few days later, pacing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. "Cygnus is rudderless. Their tech is 2 years behind ours. The Caliphate Fund deal is a formality. We just need to close." He felt invincible. His personal life was streamlined. His professional life was about to reach its zenith. He had everything he wanted. On the 10th day after his divorce, Alistair was at his desk reviewing the final proposal for Project Chimera. His phone buzzed with a news alert from Bloomberg. He glanced at it, expecting another update on market fluctuations. The headline made the world stop. "Shake-up in tech, Cygnus Dynamics appoints Helena Vance as new CEO." Alistair stared at the screen. He read the name again. And again. Helena Vance. It had to be a mistake. A different Helena Vance. A typo. He clicked the link. The article opened to a professionally shot photograph of Helena. It was a picture he'd never seen before. She wasn't smiling her soft socialite smile. Her expression was focused, her eyes sharp with an intensity he hadn't seen since the day in the courtroom. She looked powerful. She looked formidable. He read the first paragraph, his blood turning to ice. Cygnus Dynamics announced today that its board has unanimously appointed Helena Vance as its new chief executive officer, effective immediately. Vance, a reclusive figure in the tech world, brings a formidable but largely unknown background to the role. The appointment comes as a shock to Wall Street, positioning Cygnus for an aggressive new chapter in its rivalry with industry leader Ethereum Analytics. Alistair's hand trembled. Reclusive figure in the tech world. Formidable background. What were they talking about? He had met her when she was curating a modern art exhibit. She had a master's in art history. That was her story. That was the story he told everyone. He scrolled down, his heart pounding in his chest. The article continued. While known in social circles as the former wife of Ethereum CEO Alistair Finch, Vance's early career is a stark contrast. She holds a Ph.D. in applied mathematics and computational science from MIT. Her doctoral thesis, Stochastic Modeling in High-Frequency Trading Environments, is still considered a foundational text in quantitative finance. Before her marriage, she was the co-founder of Quantum Leap, a predictive analytics startup that was quietly acquired by a private equity firm for an undisclosed 9-figure sum in 2013, the year before she married him. The room began to spin. The 9-figure sum, the Ph.D. from MIT, the startup. He had known she was smart, of course. But this was a different universe of intellect. A universe she had kept completely hidden from him for 12 years. He remembered conversations, fragments of moments he had dismissed. Her asking pointed questions about his algorithms, which he'd brushed off as idle curiosity. Her sketching complex diagrams on a napkin once at dinner, which he'd teased her about, calling them her doodles. Her uncanny ability to predict market shifts before his own analysts, which he'd laughed off as woman's intuition. He had demanded she leave her world behind. There can only be one star in this family, he had told her early on, half joking, half threatening. And I'm the one building the empire. She hadn't just agreed. She had systematically erased her past. She had played the part of the perfect, non-threatening wife so flawlessly that he had believed the performance was the person. He hadn't just underestimated her. He had created the perfect enemy, armed her with a decade of his secrets, and then set her free. His phone rang. It was Marcus Thorne, his voice frantic. Alistair, did you see the news? It's her. It's Helena. What the hell is going on? Alistair couldn't speak. He looked out the window at the city that was supposed to be his kingdom. Across the skyline a few miles downtown was the headquarters of Cygnus Dynamics. He imagined Helena walking into the CEO's office, his rival's office. The silence in the courtroom suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. It wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a predator that had just locked onto its prey. The shockwave of Helena Vance's appointment ripped through the financial world. It was the story of the week. News outlets dug into her past, unearthing the brilliant buried career of the woman everyone had written off. The narrative shifted overnight. She wasn't the spurned ex-wife. She was the hidden dragon, the ghost in the machine who had been living inside the walls of her greatest rival for over a decade. Alistair was in a state of controlled fury. He convened an emergency meeting with his executive team. "This is a publicity stunt," he snarled, pacing the boardroom. "A desperate move by a failing company. They're using my name, my divorce, to get a headline. She has no experience running a corporation of that size." "None." "With all due respect," Alistair said, "David Hayes, his head of strategy, her background is more than just academic. Quantum Leap was a serious player, and she's been observing our operations from the inside for 12 years. The unspoken words hung in the air. She knows everything. She knows our social calendar. Alistair shot back, his voice dangerously low. She doesn't know our code, our strategy, our proprietary data. She was signing off on floral arrangements, not on algorithmic architecture. But even as he said it, a cold dread seeped into his bones. Had she been that good an actress? He replayed their life together in his mind, searching for clues. He saw her sitting quietly in the corner of his home office while he took late-night calls, her reading a book while he muttered about market vulnerabilities. He saw her glancing at documents he'd left on the kit, Hayes counter schematics for Project Chimera among them. He had assumed she was disinterested, her mind on whatever charity gala was next on the agenda. Now he saw a different picture, a spy gathering intelligence under the guise of domesticity. Helena, meanwhile, did not make a grand dramatic entrance. There were no sweeping interviews or magazine covers. Her first move was as quiet and precise as her demeanor in the courtroom. It came in the form of an email, a company-wide memo at Cygnus Dynamics. It was leaked to the press within an hour. The subject line was simple: Day 1. The memo was a masterpiece of corporate strategy. It didn't mention Ethereum by name. It didn't need to. Helena laid out a new vision for Cygnus, focusing on asymmetric competition and exploiting market inefficiencies created by monolithic incumbents. It was a direct surgical strike at Ethereum's business model. She spoke of agility, innovation, and a culture of rewarding unrecognized genius. The last two words were the real message. A week later, the first defection happened. Dr. Eris Thorne, no relation to Marcus Ethereum's most brilliant but notoriously difficult data scientist, resigned. She was a savant in predictive modeling, but Alistair had always found her abrasive and hadn't given her the senior role she craved. An hour after her resignation, Cygnus Dynamics announced she had been hired as their new chief technology officer. Alistair was apoplectic. How did she even know about Eris? He roared at Marcus. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Helena met her once, at the company Christmas party 3 years ago. You told Eris her dress was a bit much, and then ignored her for the rest of the night. Helena spoke with her for nearly an hour about quantum computing. Alistair felt a chill. The Christmas party. He barely remembered it. To him it was a chore. To Helena it had apparently been a recruiting event. The defections continued. A junior programmer who had identified a critical flaw in Ethereum's beta platform, a flaw Alistair had dismissed, was hired as a team lead at Cygnus. 2 of his best salespeople, who had complained about Ethereum's rigid commission structure, were poached with offers that included equity in Cygnus. Helena was targeting the people Alistair had undervalued. She wasn't just stealing his talent. She was wielding his own arrogance as a weapon against him. She knew who he overlooked, who he patronized, who he failed to appreciate. For 12 years she had been a silent witness to his managerial blind spots. The battle for the Caliphate Fund contract intensified. It was no longer a formality. The fund's representatives, who had been on the verge of signing with Ethereum, now insisted on a full competitive bake-off. Ethereum's Project Chimera versus whatever Cygnus could muster. Alistair doubled down. He pushed his team to the breaking point, demanding longer hours, faster results. His paranoia grew. He ordered security audits and had NDAs re-signed. He saw Helena's ghost everywhere, in every setback, in every line of code that wasn't perfect. They're anticipating our every move, he said to Marcus one night, staring at a comparative analysis. Cygnus had just released a patch for their existing software that seemed to preemptively counter a key feature of Chimera. It's impossible. It's like she's in our servers. Or she was in your head for 12 years, Marcus muttered just loud enough to be heard. Alistair turned on him, his eyes blazing. What did you say? Nothing, Marcus said quickly, backing down. Just, she knows how you think, Alistair. She knows your playbook. It was true. Helena wasn't hacking his company. She was hacking his mind. She knew he favored aggressive brute force strategies. So she was using nimble, precise counter-moves. She knew he valued loyalty over raw talent, so she targeted the brilliant people he'd alienated. She knew his biggest weakness was his ego, his belief that he was the smartest person in any room. And for the first time in his life, Alistair Finch was facing an opponent who knew him better than he knew himself. The empire he was so proud of suddenly felt terrifyingly fragile, and the woman he had dismissed as a decorative object was the one holding the hammer. The pressure mounted. The Caliphate Fund set a deadline of final presentation in 3 weeks at the Global Finance Summit in Geneva. It would be the ultimate showdown. Ethereum and Cygnus would present their platforms back to back. The winner would walk away with the largest contract in the industry's history. Alistair drove his team with a relentless manic energy. The offices of Ethereum Analytics, once a place of sleek, confident ambition, became a high-pressure cooker of fear and exhaustion. He slept in his office, surviving on caffeine and the burning fuel of his rage. Project Chimera had to be perfect. It was more than a contract now. It was a referendum on his genius. He focused on the algorithm's power. Chimera was a beast designed to analyze trillions of data points in real time to predict market shifts with 99.7% accuracy. It was a sledgehammer built to dominate. He was convinced its raw computational superiority was unassailable. Meanwhile, news from Cygnus was sparse, but what trickled out was unsettling. Under Helena's leadership, they weren't trying to build a bigger, better version of Chimera. Whispers on Wall Street spoke of a completely different approach. They were calling their project Callisto. Instead of predicting the entire market, Callisto was reportedly designed to identify and exploit the blind spots of other algorithms. It wasn't a sledgehammer, it was a scalpel. It was designed not to beat the market, but to beat the players in the market, specifically players like Ethereum. Alistair dismissed it as a gimmick. "A parasite," he sneered. "It can't survive without a host. Our Chimera is the host. It's the ecosystem. They're irrelevant." But a seed of doubt had been planted. He remembered a conversation with Helena years ago. They were on their yacht in the Aegean. He was boasting about an early version of his predictive engine. "It's infallible," he had said, swirling a glass of scotch. "Nothing built by man is infallible," she had replied, looking out at the horizon. "Every perfect system has a fatal flaw, usually created by the hubris of its architect. The more complex the system, the more elegant the flaw." He had laughed at her, patting her on the head. "Stick to art, my love. Leave the math to me." The memory now haunted him, the hubris of its architect. 2 weeks before the Geneva presentation, a critical vulnerability was discovered deep within Chimera's code. It was a small, almost undetectable paradox in the learning algorithm. Under specific rare market conditions, a black swan event, the algorithm, instead of protecting assets, would enter a feedback loop, exponentially amplifying losses. It was a 1 in a million flaw. The team was panicked. David Hayes, his head of strategy, recommended they disclose the vulnerability to the fund and push the deadline. "Absolutely not," Alistair commanded. "The odds of those conditions occurring are infinitesimal. We fix it quietly. No one breathes a word of this outside this room. We do not show weakness." But the fix was not simple. It was woven into the very fabric of the AI's logic. Unraveling it would take weeks, maybe months. Alistair ordered a patch, a workaround. It was a clumsy, inelegant solution, a piece of digital duct tape over a structural crack. It held, but the team knew it was a compromise. The 99.7% accuracy now had an asterisk next to it. The night before they were scheduled to fly to Geneva, Alistair was alone in the boardroom staring at the final presentation slides. His reflection stared back from the darkened glass of the window, a tired, haunted man. His phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. It contained a single attachment, a PDF document. His fingers trembled as he opened it. It was a page from a notebook filled with Helena's neat, precise handwriting. It was a complex equation, a series of mathematical proofs. He recognized the structure immediately. It was the core logic of his Chimera algorithm. But at the bottom of the page, she had continued the equation, extending it beyond his own work. She had circled the final result. It was the exact paradoxical feedback loop his team had just discovered. The fatal flaw. Beneath the circle there was a handwritten note. I found this in your study notes 3 years ago. I tried to tell you it was there. You told me I was doodling. H. The phone slipped from his grasp and clattered onto the polished table. 3 years ago. She had seen it 3 years ago. The flaw wasn't a bug his team had just found. It was a fundamental error in his design that his own wife, the art historian, the party planner, had identified, and that he had been too arrogant to even consider. He had walked into her trap. She hadn't needed a mole. She hadn't needed to hack his servers. She had his entire playbook because she had helped write it silently from the wings. She knew about the flaw in Chimera before he did, and she had built her entire strategy around it. Callisto wasn't designed to beat Chimera. It was designed to trigger its flaw, to create the very black swan event that would turn his greatest weapon back on itself. He now understood the full, terrifying scope of her strategy. The Geneva presentation wasn't just a sales pitch. It was a public execution. His execution. The air in the grand ballroom of the Geneva International Conference Center was thick with money and anticipation. Alistair stood backstage adjusting his tie for the 10th time. His hands were clammy. For the first time in his professional life, he felt a tremor of genuine fear. He had seen Helena earlier across the crowded hall. She was the picture of serene confidence, surrounded by her new executive team, Aris Thorne, at her side. She hadn't looked at him, but he felt her presence like a change in atmospheric pressure. Etherion was presenting first. Alistair walked onto the stage to a polite, expectant applause. The Caliphate Fund's delegation, led by the formidable Sheikh Rashid Al Maktoum, sat in the front row, their faces impassive. Alistair launched into his presentation. He was a master showman, and his voice boomed with practiced authority. He spoke of power, of dominance, of market supremacy. The screens behind him lit up with dazzling graphics, showcasing Chimera's awesome processing capabilities. Project Chimera is not just an evolution, he declared, his voice ringing with forced confidence. It is a revolution. It is financial omniscience. He carefully avoided any mention of the flaw, glossing over the risk management protocols with vague corporate speak. He felt the Sheikh's sharp eyes on him, probing, searching for weakness. Alistair ended with a flourish, painting a picture of a future where Etherion and the fund would rewrite the rules of global finance together. The applause was solid but not thunderous. The questions from the panel were pointed, focusing on volatility and risk. Alistair parried them as best he could, but he felt sweat trickle down his back. Then it was Cygnus's turn. Helena walked onto the stage. She wore a simple tailored gray suit, no jewelry except for a plain watch. She was not a showman. She didn't pace or gesture wildly. She stood at the lectern and simply began to speak, her voice calm and measured. Good morning, I'm Helena Vance, CEO of Cygnus Dynamics. My competitor has just presented you with a sledgehammer. It is a powerful tool designed to knock down walls. And it is in its own way very impressive. She paused, letting the faint praise hang in the air before twisting the knife. But the future of finance is not about brute force. It's about precision. It is not a battle of sledgehammers. It is a game of chess. It's about knowing what your opponent will do before they do. It's about understanding their strengths, and more importantly, understanding their weaknesses. Behind her, the screen lit up. It did not show flashy graphics. It showed a single elegant line of code. This is Project Callisto, she continued. It does not seek to predict the entire market. It seeks to predict the behavior of the market's largest players, specifically predictive AIs like the one you just saw. These monolithic systems, for all their power, have predictable behaviors. They are driven by the philosophies of their creators. Alistair's blood ran cold. She was talking directly about him. Some architects favor aggression. Helena said, her eyes sweeping over the front row and for a fleeting moment locking with Alistair's. They build systems designed for overwhelming force. But this philosophy inevitably creates a blind spot, a belief in their own infallibility. An Achilles heel. Callisto is designed to find that heel. She then walked the delegation through a simulation, a hypothetical market scenario. On one side of the screen was a representation of a powerful aggressive trading algorithm Chimera in all but name. On the other was Callisto. She initiated the simulation. At first, the Chimera algorithm dominated, racking up huge virtual profits. Then Helena's team introduced a specific set of market variables. A sudden unexpected political event in a small country, a minor disruption in a shipping lane. The Black Swan event. On the screen, the audience watched in stunned silence as the Chimera algorithm, instead of adjusting, began to hemorrhage money. The feedback loop kicked in. The AI began making catastrophic trades, doubling down on its losses in a frantic self-destructive spiral. Within minutes, its virtual profits were wiped out, replaced by a staggering, irrecoverable debt. Meanwhile, Callisto, which had been making small, careful trades, executed a single perfect move, capitalizing on the larger algorithm's death spiral. The demonstration was devastatingly clear. Callisto hadn't beaten the market. It had waited for Chimera to beat itself, and then it had picked up the spoils. Helena clicked off the screen. The room was silent. Power is not the same as strength. She concluded, her voice quiet but resonant. True strength lies in understanding, not in force. We are not offering you a sledgehammer that may one day shatter in your hand. We are offering you a scalpel. We are offering you insight. Thank you. She walked off the stage to a moment of stunned silence, which was then broken by a sudden explosive wave of applause. Sheikh Rashid Al Maktoum stood up, leading the ovation. He was not looking at the stage. He was looking directly at Alistair Finch, and on his face was a look of profound disappointment. In that moment, Alistair knew it was over. He had lost. He had not just been outmaneuvered. He had been dissected, analyzed, and defeated by a strategy born from 12 years of his own hubris. He was the architect of his own destruction, and Helena Vance was merely the one who had presented the blueprints to the world. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The news that the Caliphate Fund had awarded the contract to Cygnus Dynamics hit the wires before Alistair's plane had even touched down in New York. Aetherian Analytics' stock plummeted by 40% in pre-market trading. The board was in open revolt. Marcus Thorne, his once loyal COO, was now leading the charge for his removal, positioning himself as the stable hand needed to guide the company through the crisis. Alistair was locked out of his own kingdom. He was forced to take a leave of absence, a corporate euphemism for being fired. The empire he had built with his bare hands had crumbled in a single afternoon. He spent his days in his cavernous, empty penthouse, the silence now a suffocating presence. The celebratory champagne bottles from his divorce party seemed to mock him from the wine cooler. 2 weeks after the Geneva disaster, his secretary informed him he had a visitor. He didn't have the energy to refuse. The elevator doors opened and Helena Vance walked into his living room. She looked different. The serene, controlled confidence she projected as a CEO was still there, but there was also a softness in her expression he hadn't seen since their earliest years together. She was no longer the silent wife or the rival CEO. She was just Helena. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Come to gloat, to see the ruins." "No, Alistair," she said softly, walking over to the vast window and looking out at the city. "I came for a final conversation, one we should have had a decade ago." They stood in silence for a long moment. "Why?" He finally asked the question loaded with 1,000 others. "Why hide it? The PhD, the startup, all of it. Why let me treat you like you were nothing?" Helena turned to face him. "Because I loved you," she said, her voice clear and devoid of pity. "And you told me there was only room for one star. I was young and I thought that love meant sacrifice. So I sacrificed my world for yours. I thought naively that one day you would turn around and see me, the real me, and love me for it. But you never did." You only saw the reflection you wanted to see. The truth of her words hit him with the force of a physical blow. I buried Helena Vance, the mathematician, so Helena Finch, the socialite, could exist, she continued. And for a long time I think I even managed to forget her myself. I planned parties, chaired charities, and listened to you talk about your triumphs. But I also listened when you talked about your fears, your rivals, your weaknesses. I read the documents you left out. Not because I was a spy, but because I was your wife and your world was my world. I wanted to understand it. I wanted to help. She gestured around the opulent room. And then I realized you didn't want a partner. You wanted an audience. The moment I tried to offer a genuine opinion to point out the flaw in your logic, you patted me on the head and told me to stick to art. That was the day our marriage truly died. It was also the day Helena Vance started planning her return. The divorce, he murmured. The silence. The settlement. It was strategy, she confirmed. If I had fought you, if I had demanded half your fortune, you would have buried me in litigation for years. You would have seen me as a threat. But by being silent, by accepting a pittance, I made you underestimate me one last time. You saw me as a defeated woman. You didn't see me as a competitor re-entering the market with a 12-year head start on understanding her primary target. The $5 million wasn't a settlement, Alistair. It was seed money. He sank into a chair, the full weight of his failure crashing down on him. He hadn't just lost a company. He had lost the most brilliant person he had ever known because he had been too blind to see her. So what now? He asked, his voice broken. Now Cygnus thrives, she said, a hint of steel returning to her voice. And you get to decide who Alistair Finch is without Etherian. Maybe for the first time you'll build something that isn't based on the need to be the only star in the sky. She walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. For what it's worth, Alistair, she said, looking back at him one last time. I never wanted to destroy you. I just wanted to be seen. You're the one who made this a war. Then she was gone, leaving Alistair Finch alone with the ghost of the woman he had created and the ruins of the man he used to be. 1 year later, the New York skyline had a new gleaming addition. The Cygnus Dynamics Tower, a marvel of modern sustainable architecture, stood tall in the heart of the financial district. Its offices were open, collaborative spaces filled with the vibrant hum of innovation. Helena Vance stood in her office on the top floor. It was not the imposing solitary throne room that Alistair had favored. It was a light-filled space with a large round table at its center surrounded by whiteboards covered in complex equations and strategic plans. Eris Thorne and her other executives were with her, laughing as they debated a new venture. Helena had transformed Cygnus from an underdog into a new kind of industry leader. They were lauded for their ethical approach to AI, their dynamic company culture, and their visionary CEO. She was on the cover of Forbes not as a socialite or an ex-wife, but as the strategist who had redefined the tech landscape. She was dating a quiet, brilliant astrophysicist from Columbia University who was completely unimpressed by her fortune but fascinated by her mind. She was for the first time in over a decade completely and utterly herself. Across the city, in a much smaller, more modest office, Alistair Finch was trying to build again. Etherian had been acquired in a hostile takeover, its assets absorbed by a larger competitor. Marcus Thorne was long gone, pushed out by the new leadership. Alistair had started a small consulting firm. He was humbled, stripped of his power and wealth. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, weary knowledge. He had 2 employees. He worked late, not fueled by ambition, but by the simple need to create something of value again, something real. Sometimes late at night he would look out his window at the distant shining beacon of the Cygnus Tower. He didn't feel hatred anymore. He felt a profound sense of loss and a strange, grudging respect. He had been so obsessed with building an empire of glass and steel that he had failed to recognize the true treasure that was living in his own house. He had once told her there could only be one star. He had been right. He had just been spectacularly, catastrophically wrong about which one it was. Helena's light wasn't just shining. It was illuminating the entire city, a city that now felt like it belonged to her. And he was just a man on the ground looking up, finally seeing her clearly in the dark. 2 years passed. The name Helena Vance was no longer synonymous with a dramatic divorce, but with visionary leadership. Cygnus Dynamics had not only thrived, it had set a new industry standard for ethical AI and sustainable growth. Helena, the keynote speaker at the 2025 Web Summit in Lisbon, stood before a rapt audience of thousands. She spoke not of market domination, but of responsibility, not of predictive power, but of technological humility. She had become the conscience of an industry long thought to have none. The greatest danger of our creations, she concluded, her voice echoing through the vast arena, is not that they will become smarter than us, but that we will forget they are a reflection of us. Our brilliance, yes, but also our biases, our blind spots, and our hubris. As the applause thundered, a frantic aide rushed to the side of the stage holding up a tablet. The screen was a cascade of blood-red financial tickers. Helena's face remained impassive, but a flicker of concern crossed her eyes. This was not normal market volatility. This was a hemorrhage. By the time her corporate jet was in the air heading back to New York, the world was in chaos. It was being called the Digital Blitz, a cyber attack of unprecedented scale and sophistication. It wasn't aimed at a single bank or exchange. It was targeting the very trust architecture of the global financial system. Algorithms from New York to Tokyo, London to Hong Kong were behaving erratically, triggering cascading sell-offs in a feedback loop that was threatening to vaporize trillions of dollars in wealth. Helena's own creation, Callisto, was struggling. It was designed to be a scalpel to dissect the logical, predictable flaws of competitors. But this new threat wasn't logical. It was pure weaponized chaos. It didn't have a rational weakness to exploit. It was behaving like a digital pathogen, infecting every system it touched with its own irrationality. The sledgehammers and the scalpels were equally useless. An emergency task force was convened by the U.S. Treasury Department at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Helena, along with the CEOs of every major financial and tech firm, was summoned. The room was a fortress of glass and steel, 30 floors above a city grinding to a halt with fear. The mood was grim. For 12 hours, the greatest minds in finance threw everything they had at the problem, but the digital bleeding wouldn't stop. They were fighting a ghost they couldn't see. Meanwhile, in a small, nondescript office in Brooklyn, Alistair Finch was staring at the same data, but he was seeing something different. His consultancy, Finch Forensics, was a tiny niche firm with only 3 employees. After losing everything, he had become obsessed not with building systems, but with understanding how they break. He wrote obscure, dense papers on systemic failure, cascade vulnerabilities, and the philosophy of algorithmic collapse. He was no longer a king, he was a coroner. As he watched the global data feeds, he saw a pattern in the chaos that no one else did. It was a faint signature, an echo in the noise. It was a ghost, he knew. Back at the Fed, the Treasury Secretary, a formidable woman named Evelyn Reed, was at her wits' end. "We are hours away from a complete market collapse," she stated, her voice tight with tension. "Every solution we propose is a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. We need a new perspective." It was then that a junior analyst from the SEC, a young man who had studied Alistair Finch's fall as a case study in business school, cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "there is someone. He's not in the mainstream anymore, but his recent work is entirely focused on this kind of event. Alistair Finch." A cold silence fell over the room. The name was poison. The man who had spectacularly imploded his own multi-billion-dollar company. Helena's expression didn't change, but her hands resting on the polished table tightened into fists. "Finch is a pariah," sneered the CEO of a rival bank. "He's yesterday's news." "With all due respect, sir," the analyst pressed on. His last paper was titled, "Weaponized Chaos Modeling Trust, Annihilation in Closed AI Networks." It's like he wrote the playbook for what's happening right now. Desperation trumped pride. 2 hours later, Alistair Finch walked into the command center. He was not the man they remembered. The bespoke suit was gone, replaced by a simple dark sweater and trousers. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet, intense focus. He looked older, wearier, but his eyes as they scanned the screens were sharper than ever. He nodded curtly at the secretary, his gaze sweeping past Helena as if she were a stranger. He didn't need a briefing. He walked directly to the main data wall, his eyes tracing the chaotic patterns. "You're all looking at the trades?" he said, his voice quiet, but carrying across the silent room. "You're trying to stop the financial bleeding. You're wrong. This isn't a financial attack. It's an ontological one." He turned to face the room of bewildered titans. "It's an attack on the trust between the machines. The virus isn't just executing bad trades. It's impersonating the digital signatures of other AIs. It's making your algorithm think my algorithm has gone rogue, forcing a defensive, then a preemptive strike. It has created a digital war of all against all." He pointed to a string of code deep in the logs, a piece of data so obscure everyone else had missed it. "And it's using a foundational architecture I designed a decade ago, a protocol for adaptive camouflage. It was a prototype, a ghost in the Ethereum machine. It was too unstable, too dangerous. I buried it." He finally looked at Helena, his gaze direct and piercing. There was no history in it, no animosity, only the cold shared reality of the crisis. "Someone dug it up," he said. "Callisto can't fight it because it's looking for an opponent with a logical flaw. This thing is the flaw. It's designed to be the black swan. You can't outthink it because it's not thinking. It's just burning everything down." "What's your solution?" Mr. Finch, Secretary Reed demanded. Alistair took a deep breath. "You have to enact a system-wide protocol I call the circuit breaker. You can't just halt trading. You have to sever the API handshakes between all major autonomous platforms. You have to shut down the communication. You have to force every AI in the world into solitary confinement. You have to go dark." The implications were staggering. To freeze not just the markets but the very infrastructure that ran them. It was an unprecedented move that could calm the panic or trigger a global depression. All eyes in the room turned to Helena. Her system, Callisto, was the most sophisticated and integrated on the planet. If she agreed, if she voluntarily took her own queen off the board, others might follow. Her decision would set the precedent. Helena stood up, the weight of the world on her shoulders. She looked at Alistair, not her ex-husband, the man she had defeated, but the architect of the monster they were now both facing. He had built the cage, and now he was the only one who knew where to find the key. The past had returned not as a ghost to haunt them, but as a crisis that bound their fates together once more. "He's right," Helena said, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "Take Cygnus offline. Now." And so the story of Alistair and Helena comes to a close. It's a powerful cautionary tale that proves the most dangerous person in the world is the one you underestimate. Helena's silence wasn't weakness. It was the sharpening of a blade. She played the long game, armed with intelligence, patience, and an intimate knowledge of her opponent's greatest flaw, his ego. Her victory wasn't just in the boardroom. It was in reclaiming the brilliant identity she had sacrificed for a man who couldn't see past his own reflection. What do you think? Was Helena's revenge justified? Or was it a cold, calculated plot from the start? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of ambition, betrayal, and ultimate triumph, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing it with someone who loves a good story. And for more deep dives into tales of drama and intrigue, just like this one, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for listening.